Can you tell us exactly what the British police are doing to help you?
Well, they are now going to the police to the station, railroad station of Jet. That is the nearest station, and they are trying to make several convoys of trains to put the English people as soon as possible, so much as possible, to Ostend, and to get some boats there to go back to England.
Extra staff have been drafted into Brussels hospitals to cope with the wounded. The death toll is now put at 38, with 257 injured, 15 of them in a critical condition. As the treatment goes on, Brussels police face the task of keeping the rival fans apart.
The tragedy is over, the dead and injured taken away, but still the Liverpool fans will not let up. For an hour they riot. Police line up to confront them. Missiles are thrown, a policeman is hit. The fighting fans turn their attention on the police and outnumber them, forcing the police to run for their own safety. Mounted police reinforcements come in. A group of fans turn on the one fan with a bag round his neck. The fan at the back of the picture picks up a brick and throws it at him. He seeks refuge with the police. But the police misinterpret his action, and they too turn on him. Still, the fans riot. Italian fans tell the Liverpool fans what they think of them, a gesture clearly prepared well before this evening. The rioting escalates. Now it's smoke bombs and pieces of burning wood. For an hour, the fans riot, and the match has not yet begun.
Against such a violent backdrop, the match itself was predictably a tense and subdued affair. How much the players have been told of the tragedy isn't clear, but the action at times reflected the shocked mood in the stadium. Liverpool's Lawrenson lasted just 3 minutes when an old shoulder injury returned. He left for the dressing room, no doubt relieved to be out of the fray. The Juventus defensive tactics were as ever uncompromising. Paul Walsh's run ended by a heavy Tardelli tackle. But as a sterile first half went on, Liverpool began to show a few touches of their former European glory. Walsh's snapshot well saved by Taccioni. Juventus were relying on the breakaway, but only once did it get Cabrini a clear shot, Grobbelaar's athletic dive keeping it out.
It's pot, isn't it?
Cannabis has been illegal in this country since 1928. For 75 years, governments have fought to suppress its use and control information about it. Yet, alongside this official policy of prohibition, there's been a steady move towards social acceptance of the drug. The story of how this extraordinary sea change in public opinion came about is the story of how the media came under the influence of the cannabis years. Reefer Madness was an early American propaganda film that deliberately set out to demonize marijuana, a drug which up until then had been considered relatively harmless. Using education as its battle cry, it made sensationalist claims about what befell those who smoked it.
Here is an example.
A 16-year-old lad apprehended in the act of staging a holdup. 16 years old and a marijuana addict. Here is a most tragic case.
Yes, I remember. Just a young boy. Under the influence of the drug, he killed his entire family with an axe.
In reality, many Americans, especially those in the entertainment industry, knew differently. It was through them that more relaxed information about the drug began to filter out.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud to introduce somebody tonight. I want you to come on back to the bar because this is somebody very special. He's the one and only Chico Marx.
How we got our names is a very interesting thing. When we were kids in school, we used to wear a little bag goes around the neck, was called a grouch bag. In this bag, we would keep our pennies, our marbles, piece of candy, little marijuana, whatever we could pick up. Well, we were studying to be musicians.
Interviewed by Malcolm Muggeridge and a young Jonathan Miller on the arts program Monitor, writer Norman Mailer discussed using marijuana as a writing aid.
Business of running on drugs. Sometimes you write as though you were definitely, I mean, drugs were the sort of motive power when you were writing.
No, I've never written on drugs. I've edited on drugs. I've never written on drugs.
It's when you were doing that weekly in Greenwich Village.
Well, what I would do is I would write the thing. Let me shift that. I'm certain I've written paragraphs and pages here and there when I've been on drugs. Or at least when I've been so ridden with drugs, even if I weren't taking them, my system was full of them, you see. But generally speaking, I've done practically all my writing without drugs, but I have done things like edit when I'm dead drunk, you see, or on marijuana. And then, of course, I always go through it afterward, go back over it. I always finish off something sober because, you know, when all said, it seems to me that, you know, when everything else goes wrong in your life, the one thing you've got to hold on to is the respect for your craft. You know, it's no way to become a writer to take the drugs. One takes the drugs for other reasons. I mean, I put it this way, I'd rather take marijuana than take penicillin. To me.
You have a view that these things like penicillin and the modern drugs are in fact part of the plague, part of the armaments of the devil, don't you?
I cordially agree. But you as a
Small cliques of intellectuals were by no means representative of the public at large. But cannabis was beginning to make an appearance in youth circles and among those looking for something different.
It was almost the first really serious countercultural illegal substance that people discovered in the years after the Second World War.
It grew in popularity through the 50s. You had the beginnings of a kind of folk club scene, you had sort of coffee bars and all these kinds of adolescent, teenage youth culture when you began to get the beginnings of more of a sort of music culture in this country, jazz in particular.
I was part of a movement called the Revivalist Jazz Movement during the late 40s and 50s. And we were all very puritanical about drugs. This was because we were very much against the modernists who played bebop in the style of Charlie Parker and so on. And we thought, and we knew, and we were right, that they all smoked a lot of dope.
About a reefer 5 feet long, mighty immense but not too strong. You be high but not for long if you a viper.
The funny thing was, there we were playing all these old tunes from the 20s, King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, so on, and wagging our fingers at how naughty it was to smoke dope. And in fact, the early jazz people smoked it a lot. The great blues singer Bessie Smith did. And when her niece was being interviewed by Michael Albertson, who wrote a book about Bessie, he said to the niece, tell me, did Bessie smoke shit? And the niece said, oh no, just regular reefers. You know, there was sort of misunderstanding.
At the end of the 50s, cannabis was still mainly to be found in the jazz joints and bohemian backstreets of London. But outside the capital, pockets of bohemianism were emerging in big dock cities like Liverpool and Bristol. It was through these that the traffic of the world flowed.
How does it get here to Bristol?
Through the ports, such as the Pool of London, Bristol and Liverpool and so on, and then it's distributed throughout the country.
And who circulates it then?
Well, I think there's a large number of people, mainly coloured men, and a few white people that are mixed up in this.
Clubs like this catered for a new immigrant population and were places where black and white cultures mixed freely.
I guess it can't be denied that a lot of white people became introduced to weed through black culture. I don't think anyone could deny that. But it wasn't forced on anybody. You know, we didn't come and stick joints in your face. You came and took the shit.
As the 50s became the 60s, cannabis moved on from the haunts of beatniks and sailors and into the living rooms of the middle classes.
Let's face it, the English aren't known for sort of being freed up, you know what I mean? There's a whole stiff upper lip thing. And I think, along with the influx of different cultures, music, and copious amounts of weed, the English have definitely got a lot looser.
This programme was made by director John Borman for the new BBC Two channel. It was the first time that casual reefer smoking had been shown on television.
Can I have this? Drag of this?
There's a big story attached to this, you see. In Guyana, the maidens go out at midnight naked.
Quit yattering, Dad. Just roll, will ya?
Yeah.
14-year-old maidens.
You're dropping it. Who is making with the fire, like the matches?
In 1966, news cameras filmed a group of publicans being shown various forms of cannabis and smoking paraphernalia by the local police. Most of them clearly had never seen or smelt the drug before.
Oh, yes, I'm turning now, yeah.
Just like
Yes. Oh, it's very different from tobacco, isn't it?
Yes.
This is the same stuff.
Even the effects needed explaining.
Well, it makes them high. This is the expression that's usually used. It makes them feel very good, forget all their cares and worries, and sends them up on top of the clouds. Unfortunately, when they come out of this, they go down into a fit of depression.
The authorities' efforts to suppress cannabis took a knock with the arrival of the hippie movement. Far from being depressed, these were people who trumpeted the beneficial effects of the drug on their lifestyle.
I guess I first became aware of dope in about 1968 when I was 17 and first came to London, and people were smoking dope, and it was part of a hippie culture. It went along with communes and brown rice and you know, free love and not having to get married and working in a counterculture kind of way. And we would always say, you know, that smoking dope was a lot less dangerous and damaging to you than your parents' dry martinis in the evening.
The media found hippies fascinating, and some of TV's best-known journalists went to America to report on them and on the prevalence of pot. Michael Parkinson went to a love-in.
The hippies call themselves the love generation. The one love they all share is not something you see, but something you smell. It is the unmistakable aroma of marijuana, and no amount of burning incense can disguise it.
They publicised it very heavily because everybody's sort of archetypal image of the 60s hippie was somebody too stoned or stupid to even, you know, work out how to ring the speaking clock. And that kind of led to the sort of the mythicised version that all drug use was about getting completely obliterated and regressing to a kind of Stone Age level of consciousness.
Charles Wheeler dropped in on the hippies of the Morning Star Ranch.
Among the woodland hippies, marijuana is smoked quite freely. Joints are passed round like pipes of peace. Some of the hippies have found contentment in Morning Star, and they clearly hope to stay.
There's lots of good people. It's a beautiful place.
Do you like the solitude?
Super good.
Or the company?
Both.
Both. What about the drug thing? How important is this?
To me, not very. I like it.
Yeah.
But if it's not here, it's not here.
There was a bewilderment, really, I think about it, is not knowing quite what to make of this, because these were huge numbers of people coming together and being quite happy to live in a field for 3 or 4 days, and things like that had just not happened, so therefore they were newsworthy. So on the whole, the news reports were pretty straight.
And the roving eye of Alan Wicker observed the alternative tribes of Haight-Ashbury.
Hippie philosophy is hostile to hard drugs like heroin, but based on psychedelic drugs which provide instant mysticism like LSD, peyote, marijuana. They swallow these mind-expanding drugs illegally, while the coachfuls of tourists who daily come to stare at them stay legally hooked on booze, cigarettes and tranquilizers. Hippies have a clear vision of the ideal community. Everyone turned on and beautiful and loving and floating free. They work a little, beg a little, and though as rebels they may be parasitic, they're earnest and peaceful, sometimes utterly peaceful.
It's hard now to grasp how much the hippie movement worried people, but worry them it did.
This was a new generation who were behaving in a very incomprehensible way to their parents. I mean, this was an age of rebellion. I think people's backs were put up, and so they wanted to kind of stamp on it, and it was difficult to know what to stamp on, but one of the things you could stamp on was get a bloke who was smoking a joint. You couldn't really prosecute someone for having long hair and walking around Hyde Park in bare feet.
The authorities felt they'd lost control. Their way of trying to regain it was often by brute force.
One of the most iniquitous things about the whole situation in the 60s was that the police would kick down front doors and bust you in the middle of the night. And actually one of the reasons why release started was because what started happening is just people would disappear off the streets.
I've got a search warrant. I'll show it to you if you like to. Somebody stand at the door. Nobody goes out.
What happened was that in order to kind of threaten and harass the alternative society, the police started to pick off our heroes to make an example of our heroes.
There was a particular detective sergeant in West End Central who really made it his business to go in for star busts and would stomp around London with his lads, desperately looking for people so that he could get, front page coverage.
They arrested Jagger for having a few pet pills he'd acquired legally, and the judge was determined to make the most of it. And then later on they started to bust the Beatles.
Ow! People gather around me, is it who it may concern? I'm not trying to run your life,
but you're never too old to learn.
Stop worrying about your neighbors and the fancy thing they got. God bless you, find a shoe, you're gonna wind up on the spot.
It began to look, even to the media, as if the whole thing was a witch hunt. Eventually, the Times, in a famous editorial in '67 called "Who Breaks a Butterfly on a Wheel," particularly about the Mick Jagger, Keith Richard bust, saying that it really had gone too far.
This was the first real indication that not everyone agreed with the persecution of pot smokers, and it didn't go unnoticed.
But a lot of us, I forget who started it, said it would be a good idea to put a letter in the Times saying that the law against marijuana was unenforceable in practice and anyway ridiculous. And so we all did sign it. I signed it among many others, including several of the Beatles. A huge list, and very distinguished people, MPs, quite a few dons. So it didn't have any effect.
Mick Jagger successfully appealed against his conviction and was flown by Granada Television to confront the press and leading establishment figures, including the editor of the Times, William Rees-Mogg.
Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones leader, sentenced to jail a month ago on drugs charges, is free. Earlier today, he won his appeal against the prison sentence, and tonight he flew by helicopter to an outside broadcast location 30 miles from London to appear in World in Action. Publicity since the case has shown up a split between the society which resents the anarchy of people like the Stones and that which favours greater individual freedom. Tonight, World in Action examines the reasons for this split.
You're often taken as a sort of symbol of rebellion. Do you think that the society that you live in is one you ought to rebel against, or do you think you're rebelling against it?
Yes, definitely rebelling against it. I mean, not in the obvious way that a newspaper or pop sort of headline would do it. But obviously we feel there are things wrong with society. But I haven't, until very recently, been into this kind of discussion at all, because I haven't really felt it's been my place. Lord Parker today said you have a great responsibility which has been so much pushed upon us. Rather, you know, the influence that we have has been pushed upon us, especially during this drug thing. We was asked to make certain pronouncements on it, where this is really, all this kind of thing is really part of one's private life. And before this, I didn't really want to talk about it.
Unease over the overzealous application of the law was picked up on by satirists of the day and lampooned in comedy programmes like Monty Python.
You are Sandy Camp, the actor?
Yes.
I must warn you, sir, that outside I have police dog Josephine, who is not only armed and trained to sniff out certain substances, but is also a junkie.
What are you after?
Oh! 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 There is a brown paper bag I have found on the premises. I must confiscate this, sir, and take it with me for clinical examination.
Wait a minute, you just got that out of your pocket.
What?
Well, what's in it anyway? Sandwiches?
Sandwiches? Blimey, whatever did I give the wife?
By the time Paul McCartney was charged with growing marijuana on his farm, a certain levity had even crept into the news reports.
As he left the court, McCartney, who'd been given 2 weeks to pay the fine, said, "The judge is a great guy."
It was said in court that you had considerable interest in horticulture. Now, this might surprise some of your fans. When did this start?
A couple of years ago, you know.
And where have you been doing your gardening, etc.?
At the farm, you know, yeah. My dad's a keen gardener, you know. I think it's rubbed off.
It was said that those seeds had been sent to you. How did you come to grow them?
Yeah, well, we got a load of seeds, you know, kind of in the post, and we didn't know what they were, you know. We kind of planted them all, and 5 of them came up illegal.
This illegal drug was gradually influencing the mainstream by stealth. The image of the stoned hippie had entered popular culture.
Thank you, said Dylan. Now, for my first number, I should like to give you my rendition of that old favourite. Now, what was it? I appear to have forgotten. Oh, dear. But the gramophone hadn't forgotten. Second verse.
$1,000, and they could sell it to television for $500,000.
The American film director Dennis Hopper didn't have an easy ride in this interview, as he was taken to task for the film's graphic portrayal of dope-smoking youth.
Yes, but smoking pot may be the scene of a small group in the States, and I'm sure that within those groups it is very prevalent, but not everybody accepts that this is here to stay, or is indeed that it is right that it should be here to stay.
Well, yeah, but, I mean, these characters in this movie would smoke grass, and I think that, like, I would say that 80% of your high school students in the major cities in the United States have smoked grass. Marijuana is not habit-forming, and the government reports in England, the government reports in the United States, Look magazine, Life magazine, I mean, it's becoming like a joke. I mean, it is less harmful for you than a cigarette. It is not addictive like a cigarette. It is certainly less harmful for you than alcohol. And the fact that it leads to harder drugs, which is the great cry of the bourgeois, it leads to harder drugs, is because a pusher, a dealer, can't make any profit really off grass. I mean, you can buy enough grass for $50 to last you for a year.
Yes, but surely an awful lot of people who potentially might have liked the film are going to be alienated simply because the two characters are addicted to smoking grass.
Well, then they should be, well, I mean, the film basically is about people who are narrow-minded, isn't it? I mean, we're killed by people who are narrow-minded. Perhaps even our characters themselves are narrow-minded in a strange way. So I just have to relate again to the government reports that this is indeed not a harmful drug.
One such report was the Wootton Report, a royal commission chaired by the indomitable Baroness Wootton.
I am quoting from the Regius Professor of Physics at Cambridge at the beginning of this century, very distinguished medical man. This drug is especially efficient in producing nightmares with hallucinations, which may be alarming in their intensity. Another peculiar quality of it is to produce a strange and extreme degree of physical depression. An hour or two after it has been taken, a grievous sinking may seize upon a sufferer, so that to speak is an effort. By miseries such as these, the best years of life may be spoiled. The drug is tea. That makes one a little cynical.
Baroness Wootton was one of those fantastically intellectual, assertive women who were our heroines, heroes, really. A great exemplar of what a woman can do in power.
The Labour government had asked Baroness Wootton and her committee to look into the subject of cannabis. The report was published and found that far from cannabis being a dangerous drug,
the long-term consumption of cannabis in moderate doses has no harmful effects.
They went on to recommend
possession of a small amount of cannabis should not normally be regarded as a serious crime to be punished by imprisonment.
But these modest recommendations fell on deaf ears. Middle England wasn't listening, and the breeze of moderation was lost in a gale of anti-drugs rhetoric.
We have really got to come to terms with the fact that if we want a society which has any cohesiveness at all, it must be a society which is prepared to take stands on issues like drug taking and not suggest that because so many people do it, then we can't have a law to stop it. If everybody started thieving, I suppose we're suggesting that we oughtn't to have a law to stop them thieving. This is not the answer. The answer is if there were more people who were prepared to honestly stand up and say, it may not sound desperately swinging, but I'm against it. I don't believe it's a good thing.
It's interesting if you look at all the social legislation of the 1960s, which includes the liberalising of the laws on gambling, on censorship, minority rights, women's rights, they even abolished hanging in the 60s. The only area of social policy where laws were tightened up was drugs.
Home Secretary Jim Callaghan ignored the recommendations of the Wootton report.
I am not ready to take risks with permissiveness when so little is still known.
You have to be kind of a bit cynical about this, because the only time that the government actually puts in a royal commission is when they actually don't want to do anything about a topic, and it's a way of kicking the issue into the long grass.
The authorities were holding firm, but had they taken notice, they would have sensed public opinion was slowly turning. When Shirley MacLaine talked openly on television about smoking pot, she kept the audience's sympathy.
What kind of stand do you take in these areas? I mean, for instance, take drugs, things like pot. I mean, have you smoked pot?
Oh, sure. 2 martinis will knock me flat. Pot, I just sort of sit around, you know. Imagine oh, it's a big subject. Of course, marijuana, in my opinion, should be legalized. First of all, you'd have wall-to-wall prisons if you really meant that everybody who smoked it had to go to jail. So, I mean, how can you possibly enforce the law, for God's sake?
Yeah.
You'd be trampling over bodies to get to the next cigarette. So that's sort of dumb. But I think that the important thing is not whether pot should be legalized, but why they're smoking it. Why do they feel this necessity to zonk out so prevalently? Why is this checking out so en masse? Why do they feel so demoralized? That's the stuff I think we ought to be talking about.